to have your presence here. And I and Sarah will be listening in after, because we are going to record. We're recording now. And mostly it's just my pleasure to welcome Miakoda and their supporter, Katrin, and I'll turn it over to them. We've already shared their bio and what the talk is about, so I don't want to chew up time, besides to say that from what little I know of you, Miakoda, I know you to be a person of really great character and heart and authenticity and directness and spirit, and that what wisdom and perspective you have to bring is going to be really well received by everybody. So thanks for your willingness to be here and for your gifts. And with that, I will appreciate also Marie for anchoring the tech part of the call. And I'm going to go upstairs and get sweet potatoes with this child.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome, everybody. So I'm Miakoda, and I'm going to invite everyone that it is possible to turn on your video for just the first like 20 or 30 minutes, just so we can all kind of arrive together. And then for those who are zoomed out, literally, if you want to drop off or for other reasons need to drop off the video, I'll let you know when a good time to do that is. So for those who are off, if you could come on now. So I'm gonna start us with a practice. Before I do that, I just want to go over some technical administrative things, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so yeah, as I said, as in the email that was sent to you all, again, don't need to use video, take care of yourself, don't need to ask permission. And we might share a few visuals, so you might want to see if you can maintain access to those documents. I'm sure those will come up on the recorded screen share, so you can see them then if you miss them in the call. If you haven't already, I'd love everybody to type into your name, to rename yourself with the name you want to be called, your gender pronoun, and where you're calling from, the Indigenous territory. And Katrin, maybe could you cut and paste that into the chat so people can just have that information? And I did ask folks, to the extent that you had the capacity, to do a little due diligence on me and Fierce Allies, so you had some context, because I'm not hoping to spend a lot of time on that. If you have questions about the work, feel free to chat those whenever to Katrin, so we can start seeing what those questions look like and whether I need to answer them on the front end or can wait till the back end of the conversation. And it's worth noting, we've set it up that you can only chat to me, Marie, and Katrin for the time being. At the end, we will open it up. And we're largely doing that because we want to protect anonymity and invite candid participation, and ask, vulnerable questions if that feels appropriate, especially since this is being recorded, and who knows how, I haven't quite figured out how I will use the recording. So if you have tech questions, please direct them to Marie. Questions about Fierce Allies, you can direct those to I guess, Marie, is it to all the hosts? If Katrin and I want to see it?
You should specify it to one of you. That will help. You can put it in general to the host. It'll say to host, but they should specify which person they want to talk to. They want to have answered the question.
I'm going to trust Katrin's going to get them. So send them to Katrin, and Katrin's going to organize the questions for me. And so those are both questions about Fierce Allies, and then also my conversation with Daniel. He asked me to share our approach to dealing with some of the most recurrent tension points of facilitation that we've experienced in our work related to cultural healing differences. And so I'm going to speak to one of them. But if you all have other tension points that you'd love us to speak to, again, feel free to start sending those to Katrin sooner than later, so that we can do our best to speak to as many of them as possible. So those are my questions. And I'd also like to ask everyone to keep themselves on mute unless you're speaking, and ideally raise your hand, and we'll give you a holler that we're ready to hear you speak, and then you can unmute yourself and share. So those are all my technical pieces. Katrin, did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
Okay, great. All right. So welcome everybody. I'm going to lead us in one of the foundational practices of Fierce Allies, which is called the dignity practice, that is informed by a lot of different images, so to speak. The one that's probably most resemblant of is the centering practice from generative somatics. And while it's informed by that, it's also very different. For any of you who know that practice, I invite you to maintain a beginner's mind and notice what's different about this, and why we might have made some adaptations in particular for this work. And for anyone who is comfortable doing so, it's usually encouraged to do this standing up if that's comfortable. You can do it seated, you can do it laying down. I'm standing. If anyone wants to take a moment to stand, feel free. And I invite you, wherever you are, to give yourself a stretch. And as you do, invite your breath to deepen. Maybe let your knees and your belly and your jaw soften. Maybe close your eyes or soften your gaze, whichever feels more comfortable. And as you are doing that, I invite you to start using your inhales as a practice of entrusting yourself to the intelligence and support of your skin. Our skin is highly relational. It connects us, it protects us, it feels, it discerns us. Very intelligent stuff that we mostly ignore. So just take a moment or two to acknowledge those aspects of your skin and let yourself be held by it. Continuing with that on your inhales, as you also use your exhales to entrust the weight of everything contained within your skin to the support of the earth. So dropping more and more of your weight with each exhale, maybe even imagining dropping roots that get longer and stronger with each exhale, really anchoring you in the unconditional support that the earth is always providing you with. See how much you can let the earth hold you up. Staying rooted, can you also fill and rise into the length of your body? And notice there's actually nowhere to go, that you're designed to rise up, stand tall, take a stand. On behalf of the things that you love, we're designed to embody that shape. So can you rest in your skeleton's natural structure that allows you to do that? And maybe as you do, let your eyes gently open, taking in your environment a little bit. Now let's pause here for a moment and find a sensation. And our bodies are always full of a million sensations at any given moment, most of which we can get away with ignoring. And usually there's one or two sensations that are asking for attention. Sensations are generally characterized by having a location, maybe the elbow or the thigh. They sometimes have shape qualities like hard or sharp or round. They sometimes have movement qualities like tingling or pulsing. And they sometimes have temperature qualities like warm or cool. So see if you can find one sensation right now that's asking for your attention, and direct your attention there by noting to yourself its location and one or two qualities about it. And again, bringing your attention back to your skin, your roots, and your length. I want to now invite you to breathe and fill into your depth, starting with the back and filling to the front. And I like to think of this as our practice of embodying the moment in time that we are accountable to, the space between the back and the front, the present. What's behind us is ancestry. Can you feel your ancestors at your back? Can you feel all of your experience at your back, good and bad? And let all of that inform how you show up in the present. Similarly, can you feel into the future, which is largely characterized by the unknown, which means it's ours to shape. And that's comfortable for some folks and less comfortable for others, but just notice what it's like. And it's also where we're accountable to future ancestors. So can you let that also inform your presence in the present? And similarly, can you breathe and fill into your width, and maybe stretch your arms wide or stretch your hands and feet wide, and really allow that expansion to happen in your hips and your shoulders and all across your body. And I like to think of this as a practice of embodying our design to take up space, to impact and be impacted by all of life, but particularly those that stand by us in the present, allies and adversaries alike. So let me say that again. It is our design to impact and be impacted by all of life, allies and adversaries alike. So can you entrust yourself to that aspect of your design as well? And lastly, I want to invite you to take a few breaths, letting those different dimensions impact and be impacted by each other. So skin, length, depth, width. See if you can find that sweet spot of resilience that comes at the intersection of differences, so the intersection of these different dimensions. And as you find that, again, I want to invite you to find a sensation. It might be the same one as before, or maybe that one has changed a little bit, or maybe a totally new one is knocking on your door. Whatever's true, draw your attention there by noting to yourself its location and a few qualities. And I want to invite a few of us, if we were in a smaller group, I'd invite us all to share, but in the interest of time, I'm going to invite you all to stay present to your sensation for this moment. And I'm going to invite a few people to share their sensations, again, a location and a few qualities about it. And the invitation to the rest of us is to let yourself be impacted by what others share. So whatever that means to you, let yourself be impacted by what others share. And maybe, Katrin, do you want to start us off? And then I'll follow, and then I'll see if maybe 3 or 4 people wanna share a sensation. And if you do, feel free to raise your hand and we can let you in.
I'm noticing the contact between, I have my hands in like a cupped position, and the support that my left hand is giving my right hand.
Thank you. I will share. That brings my attention to my arms, and it almost feels like it almost feels like there's pressure pressing my upper arms in, but more that my arms are pressing, my upper arms are pressing out. But it feels like they're meeting some sort of resistance. Not really meeting it, but it's like without resistance, I wouldn't notice that I'm pressing. And the energy has a warmth to it. So, Katrin, I'm going to have you track any hands that might be up and see if anybody wants to share.
Yeah, you can use the little raise hand thing, or you can wave at the screen and I'll try and see you.
Oh, I see one. I see. You got it, Katrin. Good. Is your name Kama? Kama?
Kama, yes.
Kama, great. Please share sensation.
I'm noticing the releasing or the softening, and also some heat on the shoulder neck area, just from bringing awareness in space to the body.
Great. But everybody let yourself be impacted by that. Maybe 1 or 2 more. Katrin, you call the names because I can't see all this.
Okay.
All these heads.
I'm looking.
I see Banta. Sorry, I say I can't do it, but then it's only because we're all on the front screen. Go ahead,
Okay.
Banta.
Banta.
Banta, thank you for
Banta,
correcting
yeah.
that.
Tightness and soreness across the upper part of my back, along with heat there, which seems to be also softening a bit just with breathing into it.
Great. Maybe 1 more. Laura?
Laura?
It's like a little vibration in between the eyebrows, as if the tiny hairs there are tingling and moving.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. And maybe while we're here in the sharing moment, I wonder if anybody can speak to why, just in the little bit of research you've done about our work, why we might make this a foundational practice. And let me just say a little bit about how we use it in our work. So we start every meeting, whether it's a coaching session or a team meeting or a training, with the dignity practice. And then the invitation is for people to be practicing it throughout every conversation, kind of all the time. And to, when you're in a group of people who have this as a practice, to share a sensation. And to let yourself be impacted by the sensations that people share, as well as, I'm sorry, is there a blue line across my thing, or is that just my screen is really dirty? Okay, let me see what I can do about that. Is that better? Okay. I was like really distracted by that. So yeah, the practice of sharing a sensation and the practice of letting yourself be impacted by what people share, both the sensation or anything else they might share. Or even the metaphors of the sensations, or even the piece around finding the sweet spot of resilience that comes at the intersection of differences. So if any of those, you have a sense of how that might be useful in the work that we do, which is training facilitators and facilitating fiercely honest dialogues about uncomfortable content, why might that be a useful practice? Any aspect of that? Raise your hand, we'll choose you.
You could also chat if that feels better. You can read it.
Can I just speak? I've got
Marcus,
my
yeah,
mic.
Marcus, great, thank you.
I don't know. I guess it would be, oops. I guess it would be something around like just constantly, weaving that into the radar and the collective dashboard. You know, when our nervous systems are getting lit up, and when maybe we're departing, from revving too high, and maybe just.
Yeah, great. It's a great way to track ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
Really important data, these kinds of conversations.
I think the one other thing I would add is that I know in sensations, at least in some of the work that I've done, they come before emotions and come before thought forms, and then the sensations, they're a little bit, you can't argue them as much. They're just like, oh, I'm just feeling prickly here. That's it. Versus like, if I just say I'm tired, being tired can be open to being interpreted by a whole bunch of different ways. So maybe there's less room for interpretation.
Right on, right on. I really appreciate that. To me, it's really easy for people to have access to the story, right? That person makes me mad. I don't want to work with them. Or it's a little bit harder to have access to the feelings. I'm sad, I'm scared, I'm tired. But often when we're tired, sometimes we're also scared and also angry and also many other things. But we usually pick the one that is either most familiar to us or that we think is going to have the most impact. But it cheapens the fact that, it could be a lot more than just sad or just tired. And sensations are the raw data. And that raw data is the common denominator between all of us as human beings. What makes it vulnerable to be human is being in the body. If we weren't in the body, we didn't actually feel tired, angry, it's just a concept, that would not be hard to deal with. But the fact that we feel it is what makes us vulnerable. And that's the common denominator that allows us to all be in a similar seat of vulnerability. So we like to use that vocabulary to bring us all to that place of mutual understanding. So thank you for that. Does anybody else want to add one more thought? Otherwise we can move on. I think you really nailed it for us, Marcus. All right, I'm going to take that as I'm moving on. Okay, so let me, we got another one?
Yeah, Ellen?
Oh, great.
Trying to unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. was just going to say it's hard to be fiercely honest if we don't know what's happening inside of ourselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well said.
And Miakoda, just if we're going to do more conversation on the screens, maybe I want to make sure everybody gets seen. So maybe you can look at people on the first screen and I can make sure that people get seen on the second screen in terms of
That
raising.
sounds great. That sounds great. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So again, my invitation is as you share, even in the chat, feel free to type in a sensation before you share. And when Katrin is reading off the comments in the chat, they will share the sensation, and the invitation to all of you is to let yourself be impacted by the sensation and by the question or any comments that come through. Okay. So let me go over the purpose and agenda of our time together. And after that, I'll have those who want to go off video to feel free to. Be nice if a few of you stayed so I have someone to look at other than Katrin, who I love, but it'd be nice to have a few other unfamiliar faces. So the kind of purpose of this talk is to engage in an inquiry into the challenging and catalytic role of shame and rage in your work, our work, as facilitators of personal, cultural, and ancestral healing. And what we're going to do is first, Katrin, have you been collecting some questions about Fierce Allies? Has anything come in? Okay. So again, if people have questions about Fierce Allies, I can move that to the end because you might have questions as we do more of the work. So I'm going to move that down, Katrin, in our little agenda so that we can do that later. And let's make sure we leave enough time for that. All right, I'll figure that out in a second. Okay, so let's do that at about, okay. All righty. And then the other, since we don't have any questions about that, we'll probably just jump right into the reoccurring tension points that our facilitators have experienced when facilitating work related to cultural healing and difference. And I have one that seems to come up pretty often that I'd love to speak to. And as I'm speaking to that, I would really love it if you all have thoughts on challenges you've had that you would love for me to speak to. And I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. I might stack them together depending on how many come in, but feel free to ask me any questions that feel useful. So does that feel clear to everybody? If you have any questions, feel free to add a chat or unmute yourself and ask now. Okay, great. All right, so I'm gonna share about a recurring tension. Okay, so one of the tensions that consistently comes up in our training work is when participants who are, all right, so often the facilitators are really good at kind of navigating appropriation, misappropriation, cultural nuances, and doing that well. Where they tend to get stumbled is when a participant misappropriates or says something unskillful or harmful. They're not sure how to navigate that piece. And it shows up differently depending on who the facilitator is. I think for people who embody the dominant sort of colonial culture, and in the United States that means white, male, cisgendered, heteronormative, able-bodied, educated, middle, upper class, and it could be one of those things. And particularly in response to, let's say someone says something that has racist tones for a white person, that would be this group that I'm talking about. And then it's also, it affects those that are part of the dominant colonial culture in one way, and it affects those who are part of the group that is offended by that. If you're a facilitator who's also, let's say, a person of color and something racist was said, it shows up differently for you as well. But often it's equally complicated. And I was going to have you all feel free if you want to chat in any thoughts on how this, if you've ever encountered this scenario, what has shown up for you. Again, feel free to share a sensation. what has been hard for you about this, and Katrin will collect this and share some of this as I continue to speak. So what I have found is for people of the dominant culture, shame shows up. So they're ashamed that that happened in their space. They feel like if it happens in their space, it's a reflection on them. So they need to do something about it. And often what they do about it, they either overcompensate or undercompensate. They undercompensate because they don't want to crush somebody, right? Or they overcompensate because they're doing what I often see and experience is sort of, I don't want to make this sound bad, but it often is experienced as, I'm a good ally, and I'm a good ally because I make sure that the bad ally, like I school the bad ally. So that's how you know I'm a good ally. And so that's usually what's happening. And I think it's similarly, actually, it's a similar behavior with the person of color. Either they are hoping someone else will say something or do something, or they overcompensate or they undercompensate in a similar way. So, Katrin, did any comments come in? Anybody share anything about that? Okay, great. So I'm just going to keep rolling. So in our work, part of what we do, I think one thing that feels important to note about what's different about our work than your work necessarily is where our work is actually designed to facilitate interactions between participants. And it's actually designed to have those conversations get messy. Because if they don't get messy, we're not actually causing change. We're staying within our comfort zone. If we know how to navigate that, then you don't need me to train you in anything. You can do that. It's when it gets messy, and then what do we do? That means we have just moved slightly outside, at least slightly outside of our comfort zone. And that's when we're in the realm of where we can change ourselves, change each other, be changed. So I want to just note that difference. And it's worth also saying that part of the reason I got invited to lead this conversation is when I did my ancestral healing training in November, and I filled out the online evaluation. One of the things I noted on the evaluation that Daniel read was how much I appreciated the fact that there was very little interaction between participants. As a person of color, going to a training that was led by 2 white women, I was concerned that there was going to be misappropriations and a predominantly white group as well. I was very concerned that this was going to go the way pretty much every training I've ever gone to that was led by 2 people of dominant culture for a group that is predominantly of dominant culture. So then I just contract up and try to survive the whole conversation. And the fact that there was such limited interaction between the participants is made me feel safer. There were still some, when we had the breakout groups, but they were so short and small that it was, I didn't take anything personally, even though there were a few things that were said that were awkward. Nonetheless, I'll note that while that's a smart strategy, and again, part of what I said in my evaluation was about acknowledging how that works, and thus that led to this conversation with y'all. There's some limits to that for exactly what I said, that you cannot necessarily be sure that people aren't going to say something misappropriative or inappropriate. So this circumstance can still come up. But I don't want to, I'm going to let you all decide. I don't know how much liberty you have to be doing your trainings differently than how it is prescribed. So I don't know if this is a conversation that needs to happen with Daniel or with you all, but I'm going to share with you how we do it. And one of the things that we do is, well, there's 2 tools I want to share with you. I'm going to open up this Word document and do a screen share. Hold on one second. share screen.
Miakoda, while you're doing that, I could read a experience that somebody
That would be
wrote,
great. That would be great.
saying, I'm just going to protect anonymity, but I have totally experienced that shame and fear in the moment that my space has been breached and I need to hurry and fix definitively. Body feels, oops, lost my chat. Body feels a sense of feet tingling, disconnected from earth.
And I appreciate that comment because it brings me back to the theme of shame and rage. I think for the person who is of the group that was offended, they might feel shame too, but for all the same reasons, but they also feel rage. Something they love is being, again, inappropriately spoken to or handled or treated. And the extreme, those are the two main emotions we work with in our work. We work in our practice of change. We talk a lot about dignity, which was the practice we led, shame, humility, and rage. And we call those the 4 medicines. And I can say a little bit more about that. Actually, let me say a little bit more about that before I go into this document with you all. The reason I'm wondering if I should, I'm going to come back to that. Katrin, will you remind me to come back to that and share the practice of change document? Because I think it'll make it easier for people to follow along. Okay, you're on mute, but I saw your head nod, so okay. Okay, so this document that I'm sharing with you all was created, I don't know if any of you know about, I've ever heard of Weaving Earth. I think their logo's down at the bottom, that's Weaving Earth. And they are a group that teach it's relational education, but they are teaching, a lot of what they teach are indigenous skills on really how to be in right relationship to your ecosystem, the human and the non-human worlds. And they are white facilitators. I think they now have a person of color on their staff. They have been authorized by many indigenous teachers of theirs to be teaching these skills to white people. They're like, please teach these skills to white people. And most of their audience are white students. And every year there's a small handful of people of color that sign up for the training. And literally every year, it's an intensive program that I think it's 10 months. They meet once a month for like anywhere between 5 and 10 days out in the wilderness, learning, ancestral art skills and stuff like that. And they had never had any person of color actually make it all the way through the year. By the end of the program, they drop out. They're just like, too many of these misappropriations are happening. It's too painful. I can't go out into nature in the woods with you people. And so they hired me to help them. And one of the things that I did that year was they had 3 people of color. And I sat down with them and I said, what are the agreements that you wish the people of dominant culture were embodying that would actually make you feel safe, welcome to show up in your full power, that your culture was respected? And these are what they came up with, which interestingly, as I've shared this with other people of non-dominant groups, they're like, why are these not the rules at every training I've ever been to? So, so I'm just gonna, I don't know, Katrin, are there any ones that feel particularly useful I'll just start at the top. Don't ask people of color to serve as facilitators, spokespersons, or translators of any discussion related to race, class, power, privilege, etc., without offering compensation. Katrin, do you want to read these off with me? Like you do number 2 and I'll do number 3. Are you in there?
Yeah. If your white privileged fragility shows up in a conversation with a person of color, they have permission to say, this feels like white fragility. Please process this further with non-person of color. Accept and honor this request with dignity.
I'm going to skip number 3. It's complicated. Not really, but some of them are just easier. I'll go to number 4. When sharing the lineage of a teaching, always share the race and ethnicity of the teacher you learned it from. Be sure you have consent to share it. If your teacher is not the originator of the teaching, be sure they have formal consent to share it. authorized through a lineage that connects back to the culture of origin. Need number 5, Katrin?
When introducing ourselves, always name your culture and racial heritage and note, I am a settler on the land you live and the land we are currently on. If you do not know who the indigenous people are, say so and commit to finding out. Then do your research.
I could keep going. So these are some of the practices that, let me see if there's any other ones. One of the ones I really love is when referring to the power system and structure, including education, economic, political, etc., name it as the white supremacist power structure or system. You can add other adjectives like capitalist, heteronormative, patriarchal, but do not do so instead of naming white supremacy. Let me see if there's any others that feel really. Make sure people of color's voices are equitably represented when asking folks to lead gratitudes, songs, meal blessings. Keep asking people of color to share without expectations, even if they say no frequently. Be grateful when no is spoken as their truth. Bring more sing-along songs and playlist music from cultures of color. Know and name the lineage, context, and meaning. Be sure you have consent to share it, authorized through a lineage that connects back to the culture of origin. And I think the last one that feels important is if you made a mistake or present the inquiry or are present to the inequity of your power or privilege, do not apologize to the person of color, compensate, or try to impress them. Stay on the hook, embrace the medicine of the discomfort and practice. So let me pause there. Katrin, have we got other things for us to answer? I wonder if any people want to share. And I'm even going to open it up for people if they want to raise your hands and offer any comments or questions about any of this so far.
We're not getting a lot of chats, and so I wonder if it is good to just keep checking in and see if people have comments in the moment.
Yeah. You can just unmute yourselves because it's too hard to track all this. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up the practice of change document.
Hi, this is Stella. I'm wondering, is there a way to share that document so that we can read it at our own speed?
Sure. So one of the things that is coupled with this document, which relates to some of the things that we're talking about, know the lineage that it comes from and name that, is there's a document that we also circulate among our community of practice, and they all and they use it within each other, and it's called the Appropriate Relations Agreement. And the short of it is, it's worth noting the difference between appreciation, appropriation, and misappropriation. Does anybody want to speak to what they hear is the difference between appreciation, appropriation, and misappropriation?
I'll try.
Great.
Appreciation is going to watch another ethnomusicology event and appreciating the difference in the culture and what they present. Appropriation is then maybe taking that and trying to do it for yourself, and then without giving citation back to the people who have lived it and made it. And then misappropriation would be try to make money off of it and capitalize on it.
Yeah, I wonder, appreciation, appropriation. I think appropriation is not necessarily the not giving. I think a lot about yoga. Appreciation, yoga is cool. Appropriation is I practice yoga, right? Misappropriation is when I'm then capitalizing on, because appropriation, appropriate. It's as long as you're not sharing it with other people, it's your practice. That's fine. Misappropriation is when you're sharing it. This is my practice, and therefore I'm sharing it with you. And again, not giving appropriate lineage affiliation. And I wonder if you could speak, you or anyone else can speak to what's the I know you all know this, but sometimes it's helpful to, again, be back in beginner's mind about some of this stuff. Why is misappropriation so problematic? What are some of the reasons that what are some of the harms that misappropriations cause? Again, feel free to chat if you want to, or raise your hands.
When you misappropriate another one's culture, you're taking away their power, essentially. And so we're leaning into the whole power hierarchy that white supremacy has set up. When you continue to do so, you just keep feeding that white supremacist structure.
That's certainly one of it, one reason. Other reasons? When you misappropriate.
Can I try? Oh.
Who's speaking?
I was gonna.
Jessica?
Yes.
Great, please.
Yeah. I wonder sometimes if they're part of the problematic nature with misappropriation is folks not really understanding the foundations that support these practices and the hazards of sharing that with others without actually having like a rooted, connected practice.
Right on, right on.
Can I step in for just a sec? Miakoda,
Yeah.
we have a request to stop screen sharing so people can see each other bigger.
Yes, great idea. Thank you. Okay, so much better. Yeah, right on. And I think that lends to the why we created a tool called the Appropriate Usage Agreement. And that's also kind of where this whole, the tool that I just shared with you, the Appropriate Relations Agreement. But the Appropriate Usage Agreement, you know, I think in a capitalist society is thought of as a proprietary materials agreement. And it's not because I own what I'm sharing with you, but the way that you know, the way it reads is that these tools that are shared are powerful. And when used and facilitated by a skilled facilitator, it can facilitate healing and growth. When facilitated by an unskilled, untrained facilitator, it can actually cause damage and harm. So if you are not trained and authorized to do this, please make sure you get the training necessary to facilitate it skillfully. And so when we have people sign that, the invitation is, if you want to use it, tell me. Say, hey, and tell me what context. And I want this out there in the world, but I also want to make sure that it's done well, because what also happens is then when it doesn't go well, people throw me under the bus. And they're like, oh, well, that was a Fierce Allies tool. It's the first time I ever did it, you know, and that causes harm as well. So, so I already spoke to Daniel about this, and I'll share a copy of that with y'all so that you can see it. And I'd like to ask that you honor that, and then I'll make sure that this document gets to all of you after the conversation. All right, so I was looking up the practice of change.
We have a few more comments on what is harmful and what constitutes misappropriation.
Great.
So we're hearing that harm comes from lack of relationship, respect, and honor to the source. And misappropriation. I'm not reading people's names, just to, if you want to claim that you said something, feel free to say that. But and then misappropriation, changing the content and meaning of the thing being appropriated.
Say that one again.
Changing the content and meaning of the thing being appropriated.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Katrin, can you share a sensation having just read those aloud?
Yeah, I feel a lack of connection with the lower back part of my body. It feels kind of like empty.
Thank you. And I will share one as well. Feels like there's right around my lower ribs, there's a constriction. And I can feel how much room there is to breathe into the upper chest and into the abdomen, but it's almost like there's a strap or something around, right at like the solar plexus level. It just feels containing and not as mobile as perhaps I would like it to be.
There's one more I'd like to read.
Yeah, please.
Feels like stealing, rewounding, white supremacy, arrogance.
Yeah, yeah, that all resonates. All right, I'm gonna see how I can open another document, which I'm for some reason having trouble pulling this up. So I'm gonna, I will share this with you at another point because it's not coming up in a way that looks crazy. But I want to talk a little bit about the shame and rage piece that I started speaking about earlier. I just want to see where we are in time as well.
Yeah.
And
we're
have any other questions come in?
There's a question about the difference between cultural appropriation versus misappropriation.
Cultural appropriation. What is the question?
Like, are they signifying the same thing, or is there a difference there?
I think cultural appropriation is just what is being appropriated. So whether it's culture or whether, you know, I guess you could call Fierce Allies tools part of Fierce Allies culture. There are practices within the culture, but cultural appropriation is an adjective of appropriation. But I don't think that there's a distinction of cultural appropriation is different. You can appropriate culture, you can appropriate other things as well. Although it all sort of feels related. So I don't feel like the distinction of culture is different, offers a nuance distinct from, say, like appreciation, appropriation, cultural appropriation, misappropriation. Cultural appropriation, I think, is you're either misappropriating culture or you're appropriating culture or you're appreciating culture.
Right, and there's one more
Yeah.
comment that kind of help like nuances that is misappropriation harms because it doesn't leave people to give voice to or represent their own experience and culture. So it's
Read it again.
Misappropriation harms because it doesn't leave room for people to give voice to or represent their own experience or culture.
So I'm wondering, and if the person who wrote that, I'm assuming they chatted it for anonymity purposes. So I'm gonna say what I think you're saying in that, and add perhaps something to that. But I think that it's kind of like when someone speaks on your behalf, and the harm, the limitations of that. And I think the other piece that I think is so related to the work that you all do is also when we go around appropriating other cultures, we're not actually appreciating and appropriating our own. So we're kind of bypassing. And that's so critically important. And one of the reasons that I've been drawn to the work that you all do as someone who teaches allyship, I don't think there's anything more valuable for people to become fierce allies than to do their ancestral healing work. Heal your own wounds so that you're not getting that on everybody. And so that's probably the one least talked about, but probably the most important flaw of appropriating. If you spend all your time taken from other people's cultures, you're missing, every time you do that, you're missing the opportunity to come from your own. And we, as you all know, are indigenous. We are all indigenous to this planet. And so, you know, find your roots. And whoever chatted that, if I didn't quite speak to what you were speaking to, let me know so I can do a better job.
I was the one who chatted that. I would add that was totally captured it, and I would just, one other piece that comes to mind was like thinking about the ways that I want the room to like make decisions about my own life, and it kind of feels related to that piece. Like I want room to make decisions about my own life, and I want room to make decisions about my own culture as a Jew and as a white person, for example. I mean, like wanting to represent Jewish heritage, for example, in my own way. and also wanting, so that's kind of what I was drawing from when I thought of that.
And so what you're saying is that when other people appropriate, then that, say a little bit more about what's the harm that you're speaking to. How does that get undermined?
I guess it feels like, I guess if it's representing something accurately and well and in a way that is like honest and compassionate and something like that, then it maybe isn't always harmful. But if it's misrepresenting something and then also not leaving room for me to speak about my own experience at the same time, then maybe that's where it's harmful. So maybe it has to be both pieces. Yeah. I don't know if that was super clear, but
it's a subtlety. I mean, I appreciate it. It makes me think about, I was once on a training on peace building, and the audience was largely international, and the facilitator, the teacher it was like a 3-week program, kept speaking about, we're talking, I think the class was identity and conflict. And he repeatedly would do things like, he circulated this document that he was trying to explain to the international students about how racial identity shows up in conflict in the United States. So literally circulated a document that talked about how the different ways that Asian Americans, white Americans, people of color, African Americans, Latin Americans show up in conflict. And he handed it out. Now, I was the only African American in the room. I was the only person of color from the States in the room. And so as he handed it out, I said, take this back. And he didn't understand why. And I was like, you can't circulate this without people here to actually give some humanity and nuance to this. And he was like, but this is scientifically proven. This is data-driven information, and one of the things that also happened in that training was they were talking about, they were consistently talking about how people have smart survival strategies, but often those strategies allow them to survive, but they're often socially unacceptable by people who are not in survival pattern. And this one guy brought up, gang violence. And I was noting, I was like, that gangs are a survival strategy for urban people of color. And why is it that all these other survival strategies are wise that you're talking about, but this one is pathologized? And that's the problem when you don't speak to cultures with human application to it. You don't share them within context. So that's what I'm hearing you speak to. Does that feel like that's also a subtlety of what you're talking about?
Yeah, totally.
Thank you for adding that in. Yeah. Katrin, you got anything else for us before I talk about shame and rage? Okay. I'm going to say a little bit about shame and rage, and I'm sorry I can't pull up my visual right now. Oh, look, there it is. Oh my goodness. All right. I was organized. Give me a second. I love when I'm organized and I don't. Oh, this is not it. Yeah, you can't really see it. Okay, you can sort of see it. Okay, if I share this with you people, do you promise not to read the words? Because it's in a document that we're working on. I'm going to make it bigger. I trust you, but I don't really, because I don't know you very well. So give me a second. Okay. All right, let me screen share. All right, share. Okay. So this document, let me make it a little bit smaller so you can actually see it. Okay. So this is the Fierce-Sized Practice of Change. This is the first visual. Let me show you all three and then I'll walk you through it. So this is the first one. I'll come back and walk you through the pieces. This is the second one. And then, does it have the third one in here? Yep, there's the third one. Okay, I'll walk you through all of these in a second. So the first one, I'm mostly going to walk you through this one. This is our practice of change. The outer circle, discomfort and fear, we consider the gateways to change. The gateways are obstacles to change, fear and discomfort. Often if we're feeling uncomfortable or afraid, we run. But I believe that it's when we're afraid and when we're uncomfortable that we should consider being compelled to actually move into it, because that's where change can happen. Practice, 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 practice. Why do we practice things? We practice to get better. So it's not about mastery. It's not about perfection, but really committing to having a culture of practice. Responsibility, power, vulnerability, and privilege. Those are in the wrong order because this is an old version of the image. What it should say is privilege, power, responsibility, vulnerability. And the simplest way to say that, we define privilege as access to power. We can define power as the ability to create change. With increased power comes increased responsibility, i.e. accountability to everybody. With increased responsibility comes increased vulnerability. That's the one no one's talking about. But if people get clear about that and focus on that in both their critique of how power gets abused, and also in their pursuit of claiming power, the more vulnerable you can be, the more access to power you have. So that's what that one is about. And the one I really wanted to share with you all is the inner circle, is dignity, shame, humility, rage. And, you know, it's just to say the difference between this image and the second one. If you look, the second image is a combination of, these are basically like 4 beings practicing this, right? So most people come to my work with the hope and intention of trust, of building trust across difference. And while that's an outcome of the work, I think that's a misplacement of power. If my safety or the liberation of my people is dependent on how much work you all do, how much I can trust you, I just gave my power away and I just replicated systems of oppression. So this work is actually about trusting ourselves. And what we're trusting ourselves to do is to, as I said earlier, like lean into your edge, make messes, clean up messes, right? But really what that looks like is dignity, shame, humility, and rage. And what I mean by that is shame and rage. Okay, we're an evolving species. And as an evolving species, you know, we lost the tail. We didn't need the tail because it had no use for us. So we got rid of the tail. We kept shame and rage. Why? Because they have a purpose for us. Simply put, shame is our own internal GPS on how to be in right relationship to our ecosystem. We experience shame when something we think or something we do feels like it's going to jeopardize our relationship to our community, and we are a pack animal. So when that is at risk, it literally feels like our survival is at risk, and in a way it is. So it's not surprising people act out when shame is present. They literally, what we often say is run across the minefields because it's too uncomfortable. Similarly, rage, we lost the tail, we kept rage. Rage is our ability to protect what we love. That's what it's designed to do, to give us that jolt of energy to pick a truck up off your child if it's, you know, crushing your kid, to get so angry that you can get somebody to stop in their tracks. And the problem with shame and rage in our culture is we shame our shame and we shame our rage. Consequently, nobody practices either of them. Consequently, we're not good at either. If you are unskillful with your rage, rage is dangerous, okay? But if you think about what would it be like if we lived in a culture where people were practiced embodying their rage, i.e. practice protecting what they love, they were skillfully rageful. That's the aim of our work. And similarly with shame, if we stopped shaming our shame and actually trusted it and let it call us in without having to be called in by somebody else, we actually would be much more effective in being in culturally different spaces, cultural in the broadest sense of the word. And the two pieces that bring that together are dignity and humility. So dignity, I mean, that whole dignity practice is about, I have a right to be here, right? I have a right to impact and be impacted. That's my calling. That's what I'm here to do. That is why Creator put me on this planet. And the opposite of dignity, so dignity as a shape is like, I'm standing tall, I'm taking up space. the opposite of dignity is shame, right? Like, hope no one saw that, you know. But if you bring those two together, okay, shame, I did something wrong, I have a right to be here. And you can actually distinguish the difference between what I did is shameful, who I am is not shameful. I have dignity, right? So then you get, okay, so I have dignity. If what I said was racist, people are going to weaponize shame by telling me I'm racist, but I'm the only one who knows whether I had racist intentions. And if I didn't, then I definitely want the feedback that what I said had racist implications. So I'm going to show up with my dignity and say, hey, tell me more. And so you bring those two together. And when you bring those two together, that's when you get humility, which is what we often think of is when the dignity of the collective is as important as your own individual dignity, that you're tying those two together. So then how do I bring rage, protect what I love without harming what anybody else loves? That all of that matters. So that's sort of the wheel of medicines that we're inviting people to work with in this work. And again, in this image, when everybody is practicing that, it gets messy, but the commitment is I'm willing to get messy, but I'm also really deeply committed to cleaning up those messes. And that's when you can actually trust people. So we're not inviting people to trust others because they do the work well. I'm trusting myself that I'm going to call you in if you harm what I love. And that's how my people get liberated. My people get liberated. And I'm trusting that you're going to do the same. And then that's the healthy ecosystem that is, for lack of a better word, fierce by our definition. So I just wanted to speak to that because it felt like it was relevant. And I'm curious if any, I feel like I did a little bit of a dovetail into talking about, saying a little bit more about fierce allies. So I want to just get back to you all. Any questions about any of that and how it might relate to your facilitation and or any other questions about really anything? Or we have a few more minutes, or anything you want me to speak to.
And Miakoda, you're seeing it's 3:05.
I am, thank you. Questions, comments, sensations?
Yeah, Marcus has a question. Mm-hmm.
So I've got this kind of like a pressure moving inwards in my belly, and you know, I guess there's a part that I just like to maybe. I guess there's some shame there in terms of, you know, someone who identifies as a person of color. I live in you know, the Canada. I live in Canada, and you know, it's not that I haven't experienced racial violence or participated in racial violence and racism, and I've explored these issues. I do feel a bit behind some of my colleagues who are in the States. You know, I've explored it in my own way. I guess I'm wondering if you could suggest a little bit of like everything that you showed in the document, the appropriate agreements. It was interesting because I was like, oh, I've learned all those things. I'm like, where did I learn that? I'm like, oh, I learned it, you know, unspoken from the ancestors, in ritual, from other teachers, from being called out, getting called out, and like all these, you know, I'm like, oh, cool. I've not to say like I've learned them, I've gone, but you know, oh, I'm familiar with all those. That wasn't a surprise to me, and yet, you know, you can hear my voice. There's this like some vulnerability and some shame around. Like sometimes I feel like I'm missing the piece between you know, why the documents seem like they're so like fierce, you know, like very sharp in cutting. And it's like maybe I haven't experienced the same kind of racial inequality or the same racial violence. And I guess I'm just looking for places to begin to help me bridge that gap, because I feel like I've had a pretty full-on life, but it's, I would like to be able to relate more to folks who are coming at it with such a fierceness, but also come with it. And I appreciate this work, especially the wheel, because there's a lot of medicine there, and I see the doorways open, and it's a beautiful model. So I'm not sure if my question was clear, Miakoda, but if I'd love you to speak to that if you could.
Yeah, let me share a sensation. I feel my feet on the ground, and there's a particular amount of pressure on the ball of my foot, the inner ball of my heel, and then the rest of my foot feels like there's just less weight concentrated in it. I think what I'm hearing you ask is, there is a fierceness to this document, to how we speak about it, and what I'm hearing is that there's something compelling about that, and there's also something a little bit intimidating about that. And I'm wondering if you're curious about, can I say a little bit why the choice of the fierceness, and what do we do about what do we do with those people who are intimidated by it? Does that feel like that's someone in the right realm of what you're asking?
Kind of not. I appreciate the reflection. Let me see if I can try again. I think the essence of what I'm hoping to ask in this moment, anyways, is that I'm just looking for some resources in terms of bridging the gap in my own understanding. Like, I get why the fierceness is there. I really appreciate the color, the nuance of this work that you're offering here. I see there's a lot of medicine there, and I'm just looking for some resources in terms of helping me, like, if how do I say it? I feel like I don't understand why. Yeah, it's hard to. I don't understand the what feels like to me really excessive. I guess it's fierceness, of allies. I get the need for it to be fierce. Let me just go back to my sensations. I feel a lot of like a hot, like, tingling coming up my neck and my chest, and yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I'm just looking for some resources to help me kind of bridge the gap of, like, what I feel like I'm not able to feel, and what I'm seeing, like, going on the main stage of a lot of, like, people who are working without a doubt as for racial equality, equity, and things like that. Does that help clarify a bit?
A little bit. I'm going to do my best with it. And then I think we're going to start moving towards harvesting anyway, but I'll do my best with that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's there's something in there. So I wish we had a little bit more time. What I'm hearing is, I'm sure this is obvious to folks, but I'll say, we, as it says on our website, we call ourselves fierce allies, not fuzzy allies, for a reason. And the fierceness feels essential because, for lack of a better example, Black Lives Matter. And when this stuff is not handled well, people die. And people are dying constantly because of the absence of people's awareness and accountability for the slippery slope of subtle stuff and how that leads into systemic oppression, state-sanctioned violence against marginalized communities. So that's the need for the fierce piece. I think what I'm hearing, what I'm trusting as an invitation is to also speak a little bit about fragility. And, and I think one of the reasons I designed this work is because I feel there is a tendency in what's considered like anti-oppression, anti-racism work is to, again, weaponize and shame people because they don't know enough, or because they're experiencing strong emotions in relationship to this kind of stuff. And while I get the motivation for that, that's unskillful rage, right? I'm angry, and so rage, fire, I'm just gonna burn. And if you get fried up, so be it, but that's that's the nature of fire. But if you're a firekeeper, right, the role of a firekeeper is to keep the fire hot enough that it's transformative, but not so out of control that it burns down the forest. And the way that you learn that is kind of what Fierce Allies is all about, is you play with fire, and chances are you get burned. You've got some scar tissue that helps you remember so that you don't forget. And so that is basically the nature of what we're doing. And I think the thing that feels important to say about fragility, and again, not as a shaming of people who feel fragile, but just really placing it in what it is. I mean, I feel like fragility, and I don't just call it white fragility, I call it privileged fragility, but privilege, access to power, access to safety, means that you don't have as much practice being uncomfortable. And if you don't have that much practice with it, being uncomfortable feels really overwhelming. And so it's really important, if you are committed to issues of equity and justice, which you kind of have to be if you're doing this kind of ancestral medicine work, you have to hold yourself accountable to being uncomfortable. And what I often say is, you know, as a queer, gender non-conforming person of color, I don't get a lot of say around how much comfort or discomfort I experience. You know, it's on me, and I experience it every day, all the time. And it's frustrating when people who have the right to choose it when it's convenient or comfortable enough. And then when they've had enough of it, they're like, oh, okay, that's good. And then they go back to their comfortable lives. And to me, the roadmap to equity and justice is to choose to distribute the pain, to choose to distribute the discomfort, to reallocate that equitably so that the same people don't keep being injured and forced to embody the discomfort of it, and other people can kind of dip their toe in, feel good about feeling bad, and move on. If you are really committed to this work, you have to resource yourself. Let's start with something like the dignity practice. And what I love about the dignity practice is, what I've come to recognize is pain is only pain if you decide that that's what you want to describe it as. Otherwise, it's really just a sensation, right? It could just be heat. It could just be, you know, wow, like, you know, I've got goose pimples on my arm. Usually it's that you're feeling a sensation that's unfamiliar and uncomfortable. But if you practiced it and made it super familiar, you could get comfortable with it, and you could increase your capacity to hang in the discomfort as a gesture of collective solidarity. So I don't know if that speaks to what you were asking, but that's what came through to share. I got an okay. Cool. All right. Well, I wish we had more time together. We have about 15 minutes. And I just, Catherine, is there anything else that has shown up in the chat to speak to, or any questions about anything else before we start to close?
Yeah, so, well, just a couple people just responding to the share and to the fire keepers analogy as very powerful. And then someone who's saying, I think there is an important distinction between advocating that people become better allies, and that may be uncomfortable for them, versus making people uncomfortable as the technique to make them better allies. So a concern there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm hearing that correctly, I agree. I personally, I don't want you to be my ally if you don't want to be my ally. Be here because you choose to. Because if you're here against your will, you're not going to be very skillful, and you're not going to be very useful. You're a liability to yourself and to everybody in the room. And, you know, I mean, there are folks who, it's funny, you know, I participate in Sundance ceremony, and we're in an intertribal Sundance community, two-spirit led and women led, pretty radical group of people who have experienced an inordinate amount of pain. And because we are non-conventional, because we've been around for, you know, over 30 years now. In the beginning, just to have enough people at the ceremony, there were some white folks that were invited to participate. They weren't allowed to dance, but they were allowed to assist. And somehow no one ever dictated this, but somehow all of the white folks who have ever shown up to that ceremony have ended up working in what we refer to as the shitter society. So, you know, we're living on the land, we create compost toilets. They're the ones that are trekking the composted toilet stuff back and cleaning those buckets and bringing them back. And it's interesting that again, no one's ever been told to do that. They somehow all gravitate towards that. I think it's part of the distributing the pain and the discomfort. Like somehow it's just a choice. They're like, this feels kind of appropriate that we're, that we get to be here, knowing what the relationship of our ancestors to your ancestors, and that these kind of ceremonies were made illegal because of our ancestors' imposition on you. And yet, if people were to complain about that, you know, the thing that I would say is the difference between a burden and a privilege is choice. If this feels like a burden to you, don't do it. No one's asking you to do it. If it occurs to you like a privilege, then do it, and do it with dignity, and do it with joy. You know, and that is constantly the invitation. And then I think then people say, but if you're not going to be part of the solution, don't be part of the problem. And right now we live in a time where if you are a bystander in work related to equity and justice, you are part of the problem, because you're standing by and letting harm happen to people. So it's a challenging thing, but I think that's a product of the time. And I think that people need to find their own way to choose discomfort in this if they want to be part of the solution, or they need to own that they're part of the problem and sit with the dignity of that, sit with the shame of that with dignity. Yeah. All right, so I want to invite, we just have a few minutes left. I'm going to lead us in a quick closing dignity practice again. You can stay seated or standing, whatever. I'm still standing, so I'll keep standing. And as we do it, I'm just going to invite a few people to share at the end. And Marie, we're not going to do it by chat. We're just going to do it live. To feel free to share a sensation and just one thing you've learned that you might take into your facilitation work from this discussion, whether it was something from my set or from one of the comments that came through from other folks, or anything you derived. It doesn't have to be a direct association to me. So again, invite you to take a moment to soften or close your eyes. Let your breath deepen, and trusting yourself to your skin. Exhaling your weight to the earth, dropping roots. Inhaling and filling into your length, letting your eyes open as you do. Breathing and filling into your depth, the back and the front. Breathing and filling into your widths. Looking for that sweet spot of resilience that comes at the intersection of differences. Find a sensation. When you're ready, share it. And as other people share, I invite you to let yourself be impacted again by sensation and comments. Katrin, you have anything you want to start us off? Sensation and anything you might take into your work as a facilitator?
I have an awareness of my skin as a sum total. It almost feels like an energy field. I mean, I've learned some things about Zoom and how to feel connected through Zoom. I think the constant invitation to share sensations and identify them in myself has really helped me stay present in this, you know, we're all trying to like do this kind of work in a that's about connection in this distanced way. And so it really, for me, I'm recognizing how much I need to constantly check in and connect with myself in order to be able to do that.
Beautiful. Anybody else, feel free to just unmute yourself, share a sensation, share anything you learned, or just, you know, any just words of reflection.
Yeah.
Oops.
Sorry about that. We have two computers in the same room.
Okay.
My sensation was a real elongated sense in my neck, and then it kind of went to crunchy one. I want to say thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciated the wheel of four. I feel like I've embraced anger as a boundary setting emotion and a really valuable tool for protection, and but shame has been trickier. Just like, you know, you can feel like the slight sometimes tail tuck and like, and, you know, trying to like, I don't really, you know, when these things happen. And but I really appreciate how you articulated that as an agent of change, and kind of like the distinction between shame and humility and those. So I appreciate and I really appreciate the embodied work, the way that the meditation coming into it felt really, really great, and the ancestors, feeling the ancestors at your back and the descendants at your front, and it feels like that's really connective in a group from time and space. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Working.
Anybody else? Great, thanks. And I'll invite, if there's any, also, I know a couple of the same people keep sharing too. So if there's some new voices that want to chime in, please chime in. I don't want to discourage those who've chimed in, because thank you for chiming in, because there's been some quiet. But if anyone else wants to join us too.
Yeah, I'll share. I feel some kind of pressure in between my shoulder blades, but I want to kind of go back on the shame part. Growing up in Japanese culture, shame was used to manipulate and to control. And so to think of it as, like Julia said, a change agent is very new to me. So I'm really excited to embrace that, viewing that kind of, that lens of shame. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? I think as we're waiting for people to just add in, I'll just also note that I think that while I talk about, you know, trust self, obviously to be a facilitator of this work, you have to practice this stuff first before you can ask it of others. You have to know it, and you have to know how hard it is to embody shame as medicine, rage as medicine, to embody them skillfully. So it's worth just noting that. Anybody else? Anybody else? Maybe one more. Marcus, was that your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't want to take up too much. I've already gone quite a few times, so I just was like, I'll go if no one goes, but.
Go ahead.
Maybe, okay, I'll just go for it. What I'm really taking, well, let's see, my sensations, I've got like this ball of like revving up energy in the left side of my lower stomach. What I'm really taking away from this is I'm just seeing a lot of doors open up. And one of the really potent things that you've said, if it's going to be a burden to you, you know, and this whole thing around not using the kind of what's become the normal strategy of like making someone feel bad about it, and and I've always asked, there's got to be a better way. And so I see this whole door opening up, and I really see the medicine of these kind of seemingly polarities of dignity and shame, trust and rage, and how as they all have a space to be together, there's another doorway opening up there. And I just really love that model, the medicine wheel. And so I'm leaving with a lot of excitement and some curiosity, and probably some homework.
Cool.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so in our last moment here, I want to invite you to just repeat after me. You can unmute yourselves. I did a lot of the research and development for this work in juvenile detention centers, and this is how we used to close out. So please repeat after me. Any positivity generated?
Any
positivity
generated.
We give away to all of life.
Give away to all of life.
For the sake of freedom.
For the
sake of freedom.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate all your questions. And I will make sure those documents get sent to you, including the appropriate usage agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.